The parking lot lights were still casting a dim yellow glow when Jenna Hartley disappeared from the apartment complex on Silver Spring Drive, Milwaukee, the place she had returned to after her shifts for the past 2 years. The early November night descended with a thick layer of cold fog blanketing the city like a suffocating gray shroud. At 11:02 p.m., an upstairs neighbor saw Jenna crossing the parking lot, clutching her collar tightly against the whipping wind, her hospital badge glinting faintly under the lights. She was carrying her pale blue shift lunchbox, the item her roommate said Jenna never let go of because it was her end-of-day safety ritual. That was the last sighting of her, before she melted into the fog, and what happened in the next 36 hours would haunt Milwaukee for nearly 3 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The Milwaukee night in early November 1998 settled in with a cold fog that made every sound thick and muffled, the air from Lake Michigan blowing through the rows of houses along Silver Spring Drive, as if seeping through every crack in the brick, leaving a numbing chill that slowly crept into the skin. The fog didn't drift, it lingered, hugging the roadway like a thin but heavy blanket, causing the dull yellow sodium lights from the old street lamps to spread in patchy blotches across the wet sidewalks. This was the kind of night when Milwaukee residents typically locked their doors early, and anyone forced to work a late shift just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. Jenna Hartley, 27 years old, a nursing assistant at Froedtert Hospital, finished her shift later than usual. As the staff metal door swung open, she stepped out, looking both tired and hurried, her charcoal coat not fully buttoned, the collar flapping in the wind, her long hair repeatedly whipped back, forcing her to brush it aside as she walked. By then, nearly the entire hospital grounds were silent, with only the hum of heaters from the main building and the faint howl of wind threading through the parked rows of cars. Jenna quickened her pace as she left the staff area, because the route back to her apartment complex on Silver Spring Drive looked darker than usual, with less traffic, and most apartment windows no longer lit. There were no voices, no other footsteps, just the sound of Jenna's own shoes hitting the pavement. At the apartment complex, a late-awake neighbor, a woman living upstairs, happened to glance down from her bedroom window and saw Jenna emerge through the fog in the parking lot. From that vantage point, the woman noticed Jenna walking a bit quickly, her left hand holding a phone to her ear, her right hand clutching her collar against the gusts. Despite the distance and thick fog, she could clearly sense the urgency in Jenna's stride, and especially the moment when Jenna briefly turned her head to look back toward the lot, as if checking something. An instinctive reaction when someone doesn't feel completely safe. The night was too quiet to tell if Jenna had heard anything, or if she was simply feeling uneasy walking alone in the foggy parking lot. Then, just seconds later, a dry, sharp thud echoed through the fog, the sound like a car door closing, ringing out clearly, but strangely, because afterward there was no engine starting, no taillights, no further movement. Just prolonged silence, a silence thick enough to wrap around the entire parking lot. On the second floor, Jenna's roommate began to feel worried as more than 20 minutes passed without Jenna arriving home, unlike every other day. She called Jenna's phone once, then twice, then several more times, each time hearing only prolonged ringing with no answer. The unease grew as the roommate tried texting, tried calling the hospital landline, but got no response. As time continued to pass, the roommate had to call Jenna's family to ask if they knew where she was. But the family hadn't heard from Jenna all evening either, something they insisted was not normal at all. After many more failed attempts to reach her, the worry turned into a real sense of danger. Finally, when every method of contact failed, and no one knew where Jenna was, the family decided to call the Milwaukee police to report that Jenna Hartley was missing. The first Milwaukee Police Department officer arrived at Silver Spring Drive just before 2 in the morning, when the fog had grown so thick that even the patrol car's spotlight only painted faint streaks of light across the air. As the police cruiser pulled up to the edge of the parking lot, its red and blue lights flashed softly, reflecting off the tiny water droplets clinging to the pavement, and the entire apartment complex seemed to shrink under the unnatural quiet of the night. The officer stepped out of the vehicle, Immediately noting the cold temperature, the wind blowing from the northeast, and the high humidity, factors that could affect any traces on the ground if they existed. Jenna's roommate was waiting at the bottom of the apartment stairs, tense but trying to stay calm to provide information. She led the officer to the area of the parking lot where Jenna usually parked every evening. There, the officer carefully observed every detail. Jenna's silver sedan was parked in a spot not much different from her usual one, but the way it was positioned seemed a bit hurried, the front end angled outward instead of parallel with the other cars. The street light overhead flickered slightly, creating an alternating bright and dark space that made observation harder. The officer approached the car but didn't touch anything, only bending down to examine the pavement around it, paying attention to the damp ground that might show footprints or tire marks. There were no obvious scratches, no shards of broken glass, and the car doors were closed, with no interior lights on inside. From these surface observations alone, the officer realized right away Jenna hadn't simply come home late. The way the car sat there, silent, motionless, with no ordinary signs of departure, led the officer to conclude this wasn't a routine missing case. The first step was to request sealing off the area within a roughly 30-meter radius around the car, preventing residents from accidentally walking through and disturbing potential evidence. A yellow tape line was strung around it, and the patrol lights stayed on to keep the area illuminated through the thick fog. The officer radioed dispatch to request deployment of the evidence response team, including crime scene collectors, lighting technicians, and a senior MPD investigator. Before the team arrived, the officer began taking preliminary statements from those watching from windows or who had come down to the courtyard after seeing the police lights. The first witness was the upstairs woman, who had seen Jenna from a distance the previous evening. She described Jenna as walking quickly, like the wind was pushing her, and that she turned her head to look back toward the lot a few times. But the most important information she provided was, "I saw a man standing in the shadows, at the far end of the parking lot. I couldn't make out his face, just a taller figure, standing very still." The officer asked if she could identify the color of his clothing, or which direction he was facing, but she shook her head. The fog was too thick, and she only saw a blurry silhouette. Though vague, this statement was recorded in full because any detail in the disappearance timeframe could become a critical link. A middle-aged man approached when he saw police taking statements. He said that around 11 p.m., he heard a sound like a car door closing, very sharp and definitive, but when he looked down, he didn't see anyone leaving the lot. He thought it was just a normal noise, so he didn't pay further attention. The timing of the door sound, though not pinpointed exactly, aligned with when Jenna would have been in the parking lot. While the officer continued recording accounts, another woman from the ground floor said she saw sweeping lights from some vehicle moving very slowly toward a section of road a few dozen meters from the lot, but because of the fog, she couldn't tell what kind of vehicle it was. A second man, living across from the parking lot, recounted seeing the shadow of an older truck or SUV pass through the area around midnight, but he couldn't remember the license plate. These statements didn't perfectly align, but they all pointed to one thing: unusual activity between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. No one clearly saw Jenna leave the parking lot. No one saw anyone with her, and no one heard any sounds suggesting she drove away herself. The gap between the last sighting of the victim and the family's police report grew increasingly concerning in the on-scene officer's professional assessment. Within minutes, the case was reclassified from missing adult to potential high-risk disappearance, in line with MPD protocols, an adult vanishing under unusual conditions, at an unusual time, with circumstances inconsistent with normal behavior. As the evidence response team entered the parking lot with portable lighting equipment, the first officer stepped back outside the scene boundary, surveying the entire apartment complex submerged in dense fog, with windows gradually closing as it grew later. Only the flashing patrol lights reflecting off Jenna's car windows. There were no sounds except the wind and the faint patter of fog against the tree canopy. Based on what had been heard, observed and recorded, the officer decided to officially escalate the case level and wrote in the initial report, a short but weighty line: high-risk disappearance, immediate follow-up required. As the specialized tow truck slowly pulled into the Silver Spring Drive parking lot, the evidence response team had already been ready for several minutes, standing in a group under the portable lights casting down through the thick fog, like a layer of white smoke hovering over the pavement. The cold mist diffused the light into faint halos, making everything in the area appear both close and distant, as if warping. The lead investigator took handover of the scene from the first officer and immediately requested establishing a vehicle processing boundary, expanding the sealed perimeter by a few more meters, since the high humidity could affect traces around the car. Jenna's silver sedan sat motionless in the spot witnesses had described. Upon approaching closer, the investigator noted the direction the car was facing, the angle of the overhead streetlight, and the shadows falling from the surrounding buildings. The driver's side door was examined first. The door frame showed no signs of forced entry or prying. The rubber seals were intact, and the handle surface had no scratches or deep marks. But when testing the handle, the investigator noticed the door was unlocked, a detail that could not be overlooked in a nighttime disappearance, especially for someone described as cautious like Jenna. Without opening the door immediately, the technicians used fluorescent lights to check the door seams for displaced dirt or particulate matter adhering to the edges. They noted numerous dew droplets forming a thin layer, suggesting the door might not have been fully closed for long, though the exact timing could not yet be determined. When the door was carefully opened using specialized tools to avoid touching surfaces, the interior appeared dimly under the blue-white lights. The investigators scanned the driver's seat and paused at the first clearly abnormal detail. The driver's seat was pulled much closer to the steering wheel than the position a 5'6" person like Jenna would typically use. The distance between the seat edge and the wheel was measured and recorded in the report. There were no signs of seat malfunction or unintended sliding. This position would only suit someone significantly shorter than Jenna. Continuing to examine the interior space, the investigator leaned close to the dashboard and noticed a long light-colored hair draped across the plastic seam next to the radio. It stood out because Jenna's hair was dark brown. The strand was not tangled by wind or stuck by static to the surface. It lay naturally horizontally, as if it had fallen while someone was sitting in the driver's position or the front cabin area. A technician used sterile forceps to lift the hair and place it into an evidence tube. No conclusions were drawn, just the code number, location, date, and time recorded. The floor areas in front of the driver's and passenger's seats were illuminated with high-intensity lights. There were no strange shoe prints, no unusual sand buildup, no clear mud impressions. The floor mats were not displaced, and the seat upholstery showed no tears. The glove compartment was closed. This indicated no obvious struggle inside the vehicle, or if one occurred, it happened without leaving the typical signs of disorder seen in attacks. The investigator documented the condition with 35mm photographs and videotape. When gently opening the air vents to check dust accumulation, the investigator detected a strange odor, very faint, but distinctly not the usual interior smell. The scent was slightly sharp, unlike perfume, not like old dampness, and not gasoline or oil. A technician near the passenger door also noticed it. They leaned close to the center console, noting the odor seemed to emanate from somewhere in the driver's compartment, but could not immediately pinpoint the source. No one speculated, just marked unidentified odor in the report, and prepared to collect air samples for lab analysis. The rear seat area was examined next. The storage bags were still there. Seat belts lay in proper position without being yanked or jammed in the tracks. The rear floor showed no scuff marks or slide traces. A small folded piece of paper with one corner missing lay near the edge of the mat behind the passenger seat, but it provided no conclusive information, so it was collected into an evidence bag. The investigator also closely checked the narrow gaps under the seats, but found no other items of obvious value. Outside the vehicle, technicians used oblique lighting to scan the pavement. The condensed mist made the surface shinier, harder to spot footprints. A few marks were blurred by moisture and wind. There were no drag marks, no traces from heavy force. This made determining where Jenna exited the car nearly impossible at that midnight hour with such dense fog. Upon completing the exterior scene documentation, the technicians began covering each section of the car with clear protective sheeting, secured with specialized tape to avoid altering interior temperature. After closing the doors by gripping the handle edges with sterile cloths, they reapplied seals around the seams and prepared to lift the vehicle onto the tow platform. Every action was continuously videotaped to ensure the chain of custody for evidence later. While waiting for the car to be secured, the lead investigator walked the wider sealed area to survey the parking lot once more. The sodium lights reflecting off the fog made the vehicle seem to sink deeper into the dark surface than usual. There were no other engine sounds, no one moving about, only the wind threading through the iron fence. From a distance, Jenna's sedan looked like an object abandoned in space, undamaged, no heavy impact, yet standing in the wrong context and at the wrong time. As the vehicle was loaded onto the platform, the investigator added to the report what they had collected in the initial examination: unlocked door, driver's seat out of habitual position, hair not matching the owner, unidentified strange odor. None of these details could be explained on site, but they were sufficient to determine that the car required analysis in a much more controlled environment than a foggy nighttime parking lot. As the final tow strap was locked tight, and the vehicle prepared to leave the scene, the investigator took one last look at the empty space around where the car had been. In the silent lot, only the glow from the portable lights blended into the mist, touching the vacant parking spaces. The car vanished from the lot, leaving behind a void that said nothing yet clearly no longer fit an ordinary evening on Silver Spring Drive. The morning after, with Jenna's sedan already transported to the lab for analysis in a controlled environment, the investigators headed to Froedtert Hospital to gather information from co-workers who shared her shift or had contact with her on the day she vanished. The atmosphere in the hospital staff area at 8 a.m. was quite different from the silence of the previous night. The squeak of medical shoes, the hum of vacuum cleaners, the chatter of nurses changing shifts, all blending with the familiar smell of rubbing alcohol. But despite the busyness, many had already heard that Jenna went missing the night before, and worry had spread quickly through the staff hallways. The investigators met a co-worker from Jenna's department, a nurse named Melissa, right in the break room. When asked about Jenna's schedule, Melissa stated almost immediately that Jenna had not been scheduled for the evening shift at all. She explained that Jenna had been complaining all week about lack of sleep, and she had openly said that management had approved her for morning or afternoon shifts throughout November. Jenna showing up for the evening shift was not on the schedule, and according to Melissa, it was also unlike Jenna's habits. Melissa said the two of them often compared schedules to swap when needed, and Jenna always preferred early shifts, so she could get home before 9 p.m. But on the morning of the day Jenna disappeared, Melissa still saw Jenna's name listed on the evening shift roster. When she asked about it, Jenna just said she had already swapped, but offered no further explanation. Melissa remembered it clearly, because Jenna seemed a bit flustered at the time, as if the swap hadn't been her own initiative. The investigators requested to review the shift swap emails for confirmation. The administrative staff provided a printout of an email sent to the shift coordination department 3 days earlier. The content requested a swap from morning to evening on the exact night Jenna disappeared. The irregularity lay in the wording. Co-workers close to Jenna all said this writing style was not like Jenna's emails. Her sentences were short and direct. She never abbreviated, and she always used proper commas. But this swap request used phrases like "will swap" and "no issues," expressions Jenna had never used. When the investigators asked whether the email came from Jenna's official account, the administrative staff confirmed that yes, it was sent from Jenna's internal account, logged in from a device at the hospital. This raised another possibility. Someone used a hospital computer while Jenna was already logged in, or someone knew her password. The investigators requested the IT department print out the login history for the account over the past 3 weeks. The log showed Jenna's account logged in during the afternoon on the day the email was sent, but at that time Jenna was in a group training session and not using a computer. Next, they checked the shift coordination department's call log. At the 10 a.m. entry on the day Jenna disappeared, there was a recorded call confirming the shift swap from a male voice. The receptionist only remembered it as a male voice, no name given, who said very briefly that Jenna will work the evening shift that day. The call was entered into the system because that was standard procedure, but no one cross-checked directly with Jenna. When asked, the coordination department confirmed that Jenna had never asked anyone else to call on her behalf. She always called or emailed herself and had never used someone else's voice. This made the detail of male voice confirming the swap the first direct murky point related to access to Jenna's work schedule. The investigators interviewed 2 more employees from the same department. One recalled that Jenna had mentioned wanting to request the evening off the day before because she said she would work early the next day. The other thought Jenna showed no sign of wanting to swap and had even told him in the elevator that she hoped to get home early that night. Both confirmed that Jenna never mentioned asking anyone to swap for her. None of them knew of any reason Jenna would want a late shift, let alone a reason for her to agree to getting home later than usual at night. These statements aligned with the investigation team's initial assessment that evening shift was not something Jenna had planned, but something arranged in advance. The investigators requested the shift management department provide Jenna's work schedule for the past 3 months. The record showed she always worked daytime shifts on weekdays, with only one exception, a single evening shift in August, when a coworker suddenly fell ill. Her working the evening shift that day was an unusual exception with no official reason. When asked who had authority to change an employee's shift, the supervisor said only 3 parties: the employee themselves, the administrative department, and their direct supervisor. None of the 3 confirmed a swap request from Jenna beyond the single email and the unidentified mail call. One more detail caught the investigators' attention. The coordination schedule showed the evening shift Jenna worked started at 3 p.m., but Jenna arrived at the hospital around 3:30. Co-workers said Jenna told them she didn't know she was supposed to work the evening shift until she was reminded. This directly contradicted the fact that she had supposedly sent the swap email 3 days earlier, if that email was truly from her. As they left Froedtert Hospital, the investigators took with them the email records, work schedules, incoming call list, and statements from 4 different employees. All pointed in the same direction. Jenna's fateful evening shift was not the result of her own desire, but a change that appeared through opaque channels, including an unusual email and a call from an unidentified male voice. This data was filed for the next stages of analysis, along with cross-referencing the time Jenna left the hospital, her behavior during the shift, and anyone who might have had access to her internal account in the days leading up to her disappearance. After leaving Froedtert Hospital, the investigators returned to the apartment complex on Silver Spring Drive to collect statements from residents in the building, especially those whose windows overlooked the parking lot where Jenna was last seen. The sky was still overcast even though it was past noon. The fog had lifted, but the chill lingered on the railings, on the pavement, and on the steps leading down to the common courtyard. None of the buildings in the area were truly crowded, but almost everyone had heard that Jenna was missing, and the police returning made the unease from the previous night resurface more sharply. The investigators started with the woman who had seen Jenna from her upstairs window on the night of the incident. She stood leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed inside a thick wool sweater, as if she still hadn't shaken off the eerie feeling from that night. When asked to recount in detail what she heard and saw, she spoke slowly but firmly that she heard hurried footsteps, very different from the usual walking sounds of residents in the building. The quick tapping of shoes on the concrete didn't last long, but it was enough for her to recognize that someone was trying to move quickly through the courtyard. She wasn't sure whether the sound was Jenna's or someone else's, only that it echoed during the thickest part of the fog. She added that the sound came with an unusual feeling, because normally, residents in the building late at night walked very lightly to avoid disturbing neighbors. But that night, the footsteps seemed rushed and unrestrained, as if the person was trying to get away from something or hurrying to reach somewhere. The investigator recorded this description verbatim. Leaving the woman's apartment, the investigators went to a man living in the building across the way, who had come down to the courtyard and spoken briefly with the first officer the night before. He stood right in front of his own garage door, ready to provide more details. When asked about the timing of his observation, he recalled looking out the window because he heard a car door close, and out of habit, he glanced down at the parking lot. He said that at one point he saw two silhouettes near the parked cars, at the edge of the lot close to the small exit leading to the side street. Because the fog was so thick, he couldn't make out their builds, gender, or clothing. But what caught his attention was that the two figures weren't standing near his car or anyone else's. They were standing right in the area where Jenna usually parked. He could only distinguish them by movement. One silhouette stood still as if waiting, while the other moved a short distance and then returned. When asked further whether he saw them perform any specific action, he shook his head. He only caught fleeting movement, then the figures disappeared into the darker edge of the parking lot, where the streetlights didn't reach. The investigator asked him to sketch the parking lot from memory, to pinpoint where the two silhouettes overlapped, and he agreed. Though the drawing was rough, it highlighted two notable points: the location near Jenna's car, and the location near the side path connecting to the road behind the apartment complex. Both areas were outside the view of the traffic cameras previously reviewed. The investigators then approached the third witness, a young man, living in the building at the end of the row. When asked about the night Jenna disappeared, he hesitated at first, as if trying to recall, but after a few minutes, he confirmed that around near midnight, he looked out his living room window and saw a white pickup truck moving very slowly along Silver Spring Drive. He said the truck didn't look like someone searching for a parking spot but more like a vehicle scanning or observing the area. According to him, it was going so slowly that he thought the driver was looking for an address. But what made him remember it more was that the truck turned into the side road right next to the parking lot, the same area where the previous man said he saw two silhouettes moving. He didn't see the license plate or the driver, only the long body of an older style pickup from the 80s or 90s. Notably, he had never seen that truck in the area before, since few residents in the apartment complex owned pickups. When asked again about the timing, he estimated it was between 11:45 p.m. and midnight, but wasn't sure within a few minutes. From these three statements, the investigators compiled a detailed list for synthesis: hurried footsteps, two silhouettes at the far end of the parking lot, and a white pickup truck moving slowly past before turning into the side road. No witness saw anyone's face clearly, no one could identify clothing, and no one observed any act of violence. But the common thread in all three accounts was the presence of unusual movement exactly at the time Jenna was believed to have crossed the parking lot. The investigators continued interviewing two more residents in the same complex to gather additional information. One said that although he didn't see anything specific, he heard an engine start for a few seconds and then shut off completely. The other said she heard something like a light object falling to the ground, but in the fog, she couldn't see anything. These details were minor and not enough to point to a suspect, but the investigators recorded them all because they fell within the critical time frame from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., the most important window in the disappearance. When the initial round of statements was compiled, the investigators reviewed all their notes, many fragmented pieces of information, each person remembering only a part, no one seeing the full picture. Not a single witness provided a clear description of a suspect's face or build, but despite the vagueness, a pattern began to emerge: an empty parking lot, someone moving hurriedly, two silhouettes in the dark edge of the lot, and a white pickup truck appearing right at the moment Jenna vanished from everyone's sight. These statements were added to the case file for further cross-referencing with camera footage, hospital data, and the possible location of the suspicious pickup truck on routes around Silver Spring Drive. Immediately after completing the round of witness interviews in the apartment complex, the investigators shifted focus to reconstructing Jenna's route on the night of her disappearance by reviewing all traffic cameras, hospital parking lot cameras, and private cameras along the path from Froedtert Hospital to Silver Spring Drive. Since 1998 still primarily used VHS tapes, image quality was largely limited, signal noise, low resolution, frames easily lost or blurred in low light. Nevertheless, the MPD proceeded to scrutinize every segment, because even a small fragment of footage could be a critical clue in the early hours of the investigation. The first camera was at the hospital staff exit, recording from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. The IT staff extracted the tape and played it in slow motion minute by minute. At the mark near 11 p.m., footage showed Jenna's silver sedan leaving the hospital parking lot and turning onto the main road. Headlight glare reflected off the wet pavement, then disappeared from the frame as the car turned east. No vehicle was closely following at that exact moment. The time Jenna left the hospital matched witness statements and aligned with the end of the hospital camera coverage. The investigators requested to continue with the nearest traffic camera on Silver Spring Drive. This camera was mounted on a streetlight pole about 5 blocks from the apartment complex. The VHS tape quality was quite poor due to moisture, but when fast-forwarding to the segment from 11 p.m. to midnight, sparse vehicles passing by were visible. Around 10 or so minutes after 11, an image of a sedan resembling Jenna's appeared briefly at the extreme edge of the frame, but because the camera was slightly tilted and shaking from wind, the license plate was unclear. The investigators marked the timestamp and requested a copy of this clip for further analysis. The third camera was at the intersection of Silver Spring Drive and the side road leading into the apartment complex. This was the most important camera because it captured the stretch where Jenna turned into the complex, the final moment before she vanished. The VHS tape from this camera was moisture damaged, with the signal jumping constantly, but the technical team still decided to play it second by second. And then, just before midnight, they discovered an 8-second segment that stood out from the rest. In the first 8 seconds, Jenna's sedan appeared from the left side of the frame, slowing down at the intersection, before turning right onto the road leading to the apartment parking lot. The taillights blurred into 2 faint red streaks due to the fog and low tape quality. But the most notable part was what appeared immediately afterward, an older white pickup truck with a long body, make unclear, traveling in the same direction as Jenna's car and maintaining a relatively close distance. Since the camera lacked high-speed capture capability, the truck appeared somewhat jerky, as if each frame was stretched, but it was still clear enough to confirm it was following the same route. When the technical team tried to slow it down further at the moment the truck entered the intersection, the VHS tape suddenly experienced heavy noise. The screen filled with white wavy interference lines sweeping from left to right. Only the characteristic scratching sound of worn or stretched magnetic tape was audible. The video signal distorted, rendering the most critical 3 seconds almost unwatchable. When the signal stabilized again, the pickup truck was already at the edge of the frame, seemingly about to turn in the same direction Jenna had just gone. The license plate was unreadable, and the driver was not visible. But the vehicle's shape, slightly curved cab roof, long body, faded white paint, matched remarkably well with the description from the young witness living at the end of the row of buildings. When the investigators requested replaying that 8-second segment multiple times, the technical team tried reducing the frame rate to the lowest possible speed. At 1/8 slow motion, they caught a fleeting difference in the light reflection on the pickup truck's windshield. In less than a fraction of a second, the street light swept across a corner of the glass, creating a faint shadow of the person in the driver's seat. Gender could not be determined, but the figure appeared slightly leaned forward, shoulders tilted lightly as if staring intently at the vehicle ahead. This detail was too small to verify definitively, but sufficient to flag in the imagery report. The investigators requested preserving the entire original tape and creating a copy under better storage conditions to prevent further degradation, as one more error could permanently lose those precious 8 seconds. The technician transferred the tape to an older digital reconstruction machine, attempting to rebuild each frame. Part of the signal remained distorted, but the outline of the white pickup truck became clearer than what was visible to the naked eye during direct playback. The investigators compiled a description table of the vehicle based on the captured footage. White enclosed bed pickup truck, older model, length approximately 16 feet, roof with slight curvature, rear wheels larger than front, no manufacturer logo or side decals, paint showing faded patches on both doors. These features did not immediately identify the make, but were enough to narrow it down to commercial older models from the 80s, commonly used by plumbers, electricians, or independent contractors. Upon another review, the investigators spotted an additional detail: the pickup truck's speed dropped unusually quickly when Jenna's sedan turned into the apartment complex. From the camera angle, the truck maintained steady speed on Silver Spring Drive, but as the sedan began turning, the truck's brake lights flashed twice very rapidly. This indicated the driver saw Jenna turn and reacted instantly. It did not resemble a vehicle casually following behind. It resembled one deliberately adjusting to stay close. The technical team also examined the footage before those critical 8 seconds to confirm the distance between the two vehicles. About half a minute earlier, no pickup truck was in the frame. This meant the truck appeared right at the intersection, or outside the camera's view, then moved in immediately after the sedan turned right. The sudden appearance led the investigators to add a note: the truck may have approached from a camera blind spot or a direction not covered by the lens. The investigators summarized 3 key points from the camera. 1. Jenna drove into the apartment complex alone. 2. The white pickup truck followed closely right after she turned. 3. The 3 seconds of signal interference coincided exactly with the moment both vehicles entered the narrow road leading to the parking lot. No witness saw Jenna exit her car, and no one saw the pickup truck in the parking lot. But now the camera footage allowed connecting the scattered pieces. The truck appeared at the right time, in the right direction, and in the exact area described by witnesses from the previous night. Upon completing the camera analysis, the investigators had in hand the first tape recording the presence of a vehicle potentially involved. 8 seconds that were faint, noisy, and without a clear license plate. But the initial imagery of an object that could be the suspect, appearing right before Jenna vanished from everyone's sight. After finishing the analysis of the camera footage showing the white pickup truck following Jenna, the investigators returned to the most basic step in any disappearance case with suspicious signs: checking the people closest to the victim. Among them, the first on the list was Daniel Kerr, Jenna's ex-boyfriend, who had broken up with her just a few months before the incident. There was no evidence of any ongoing conflict between them at the time Jenna vanished, but per standard investigative procedure, Daniel still had to be interviewed thoroughly. The first meeting took place in the afternoon at Daniel's apartment, located about 7 blocks from Silver Spring Drive. When the investigators arrived, Daniel appeared calm but somewhat guarded, opening the door while leaning slightly against the frame, as if trying to gauge how long the conversation might last. He agreed immediately when asked to cooperate. In the living room, the investigators started with basic questions. When was the last time Daniel saw Jenna? Had they spoken recently? And was there anything in their relationship that made him think Jenna might be in danger? Daniel said the two had parted amicably, without arguments, and still maintained loose contact. He said he hadn't seen Jenna in about 3 weeks, and had only texted about returning a few personal items. When asked if Jenna had mentioned anything about switching shifts or any plans for the week, Daniel shook his head. He said Jenna used to share detailed changes in her work schedule when they were together, but in recent weeks, she only sent very short texts, mostly about being busy. The investigators noted this without comment. Next came the most critical part, where Daniel had been from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., the time frame when Jenna was last seen. Daniel said he was home alone when Jenna left the hospital, and then went out to buy cold medicine at a nearby gas station around 11:30 to 11:40 p.m. This statement was immediately recorded, because it fell right within the window, overlapping the time Jenna turned into the parking lot. The investigators asked Daniel to show any receipt or evidence proving he was at the gas station. Daniel said he didn't keep the receipt, since he only bought a bottle of water and a box of cold pills, but the gas station had cameras, and he believed they would show him there. This opened an immediate point for verification. After the interview, the investigators left the apartment and went to the gas station Daniel mentioned. It was a small station, and the clerk on duty vaguely remembered a man buying cold medicine that night. But the most important confirmation came from the security camera mounted above the cashier counter. The footage showed at 11:40 p.m., a man wearing a black jacket, with build and face matching Daniel, entering the gas station, grabbing a bottle of water from the cooler, and purchasing a box of medicine. He paid in cash and left after about 2 minutes. The investigators reviewed the tape multiple times and compared it with the description from the traffic camera where the white pickup truck appeared. The time Jenna turned into the apartment complex was just before that, from 11:10 to 11:20 p.m. This indicated Daniel could not have been at both the gas station and the apartment complex simultaneously, given travel time. From the gas station to Silver Spring Drive took at least 8 minutes by car. According to the gas station camera timestamp, Daniel appeared at 11:40 p.m., meaning he could not have been in the parking lot at the moment Jenna disappeared. However, the investigators still noted one important detail: Daniel had no one to confirm he was home before 11:30 p.m. The home alone statement was a weak point in his alibi, because no one witnessed it. Though not enough to make him a suspect, it could not be overlooked. Daniel was placed in the persons of interest to monitor category, even though the video evidence largely ruled out the possibility he was at the scene when Jenna vanished. The investigators continued to examine Daniel's phone, messages, and work schedule for that week. There were no calls between him and Jenna on the day she disappeared. The messages between them in the past 3 weeks showed no signs of conflict or resentment. Daniel also had no unusual changes in behavior reported by coworkers or friends. When asked whether he was dating anyone new or had conflicts with anyone related to Jenna, Daniel said no. He appeared cooperative, did not avoid questions, and voluntarily provided his schedule from the first until the day of the incident. Based on all the data collected, the investigators concluded that Daniel's alibi had a small gap, the time before he arrived at the gas station, but with the camera capturing him at 11:40 p.m. and the geographic distance between the two locations, the likelihood of him being in the parking lot when Jenna vanished was very low. Nevertheless, due to the nature of serious disappearance cases, Daniel remained on the monitoring list, pending deeper verification of his movements that evening. Upon leaving the gas station, the investigators added a final note about Daniel in the day's report: alibi has a gap, but partially confirmed by camera, requires further monitoring, but not the primary suspect at this time. The next morning, once the preliminary report had compiled enough witness statements, camera footage, and alibis from those closest to Jenna, the investigation team decided to expand the search beyond the apartment complex. Since the parking lot provided insufficient direct traces, the most logical choice was to use K9 units to track Jenna's body scent from the jacket she had left in her hospital locker. The temperature had risen slightly, but remained cold, with no fog, making search conditions much more favorable than the previous night. The K9 team started right at the walkway between the parking lot and the apartment building, where Jenna was last seen. The dog sniffed around the car for a moment, then pulled strongly in the direction opposite the building entrance, toward the side road running along Menomonee River Parkway. The investigators followed behind, noting every change in the dog's response. Within just a few minutes, the dog stopped at the curb edge and began turning onto a small trail leading into dense brush. This was an area with no lighting at night, and it matched the location where one witness reported seeing 2 silhouettes. The narrow trail had soft, still damp soil from the previous night's mist, so the technical team had to proceed extremely carefully to avoid disturbing any potential traces. The K9 continued pulling on the leash, reacting more intensely with each step, leading them deeper into the wooded area along the Menomonee River. The area stretched nearly a mile, with multiple branching paths created by walkers. Each direction led to separate routes, but the dog focused on one single branch, turning left into a thickly overgrown section beside a cluster of large trees. Here, the technical team first discovered an item that could become evidence: a gray fabric piece the size of a palm, lodged between 2 tall blades of grass. The fabric surface was slightly frayed, as if torn from something larger. The investigator, wearing gloves, bent down to examine it. The fabric had a thick texture, the synthetic type commonly seen in men's jackets, not the kind Jenna usually wore. There were no clear bloodstains, but a faint brownish smudge on the edge. The evidence was marked, photographed at the scene, and then collected into a sealed bag. The canine continued sniffing and pulled them deeper along the trail. About 30 meters further, they stopped in front of an area of lightly compacted soil. The investigator used a probe to test the compaction, but found no signs of digging or burial. However, just a few steps from that spot, they discovered a second item, a dark red plastic hair clip, the kind commonly sold in drugstores. The investigator examined it closely and noted an important detail: this hair clip did not resemble any that Jenna had ever used. According to her roommate, Jenna preferred small metal clips or hair ties, not plastic ones. Thus, this clip likely belonged to another woman or had been left earlier by someone unrelated. Nevertheless, the locations where both pieces of evidence appeared lay along the same route the dog had led them to, and could not be ignored. The investigator collected the hair clip into a separate bag, assigning it an independent code number to avoid confusion with evidence directly related to Jenna. While the forensic team continued sweeping the area, one officer mentioned a historical detail about the Menomonee River Parkway area having been involved before, a 1995 disappearance case in which a young woman suddenly vanished while walking in the evening. That case had no body, no clear leads, and after many months, the file was moved to unsolved status. The last place police tracked the scent in the 1995 case, according to old records, was this same wooded area, only a few dozen meters from where they were now standing. The investigator asked an officer to return to the vehicle and retrieve the 1995 case file from the temporary database they had brought along. When comparing the marked location on the 1995 map with current GPS coordinates, they realized the two spots were less than 50 meters apart. The fact that two disappearances, 3 years apart, led to the same point in the woods was a detail worth noting, even if no conclusion could yet be drawn. However, the investigators stuck to procedure, no hypotheses without direct evidence. They continued having the canine scent the wider area. The dog began losing the trail near the edge of the Menomonee River, where the ground grew softer, and the water created air currents that made holding the scent difficult. There were no further clear traces extending north or south, but that did not negate the fact that Jenna's scent had been present here, at least in the first few hours after she left the parking lot. As the technical team fanned out to search further, one officer discovered another small fabric scrap, this time a thin dark blue thread caught on a bush branch. Placed side by side, the two fabric pieces had similar fiber structures and could belong to the same jacket or clothing that had been torn. But the investigator made no determination, only noting that they both appeared along the route the canine had followed. About an hour after the search team began, no additional noteworthy evidence was found. The investigator ordered photographs of the entire area, GPS marking of each evidence discovery point, and then sealing of all evidence bags for transport back to the lab for DNA and trace analysis. Before leaving the area, the investigator paused at the junction between the trail and the riverbank, the spot where the canine had lingered longest. A light breeze blew across the water, carrying a very faint, hard-to-identify smell, but not enough to pinpoint the source. The nearby ground had dry leaves piled in clumps, but no deep footprints or obvious depressions. The only things they had were the scent trail the canine had followed, and two small pieces of evidence lying along the path. Upon returning to headquarters, the investigator noted in the report that the Menomonee River Parkway area had appeared in a prior disappearance case, and that these overlaps, though few, needed thorough examination. No determination was made about a direct connection between the two cases, but the repetition in location and type of evidence made viewing Jenna's case as an isolated disappearance increasingly difficult to accept. In the following days, all evidence collected from Menomonee River Parkway was transferred to the MPD lab for analysis. But despite the technical team's maximum efforts, the initial results showed every lead was less reliable than hoped. The gray fabric piece contained male DNA, but because DNA analysis technology in 1998 was still too limited, they could only determine it was male DNA, unable to isolate it into an individual profile or enter it into any database. race, age, or connection to any subject could not be determined. The DNA quantity was too low to use as prosecutable evidence or for meaningful comparison. The plastic hair clip also bore no clear fingerprints. Its smooth surface and outdoor conditions made fingerprint retention highly unlikely. DNA adhering to the clip had degraded severely, no longer sufficient to extract a useful sample. Since it did not belong to Jenna, analyzing the hair clip yielded no value and did not prove the presence of another person on the same road at the time of Jenna's disappearance. Forensics on Jenna's sedan also produced no breakthrough. The light-colored hair, the most obvious piece of evidence, only indicated the presence of another person but could not trace the owner. The strange odor in the car, though collected in air tubes, yielded only vague results upon analysis. Weak traces of an unidentified organic compound, not concentrated enough to identify whether it was a solvent, cleaner, or some other chemical. These detailed but directionless findings left the investigation team unable to advance based on forensics. The traffic camera capturing the white pickup truck following Jenna remained the best visual evidence, but license plate verification was impossible. The signal interference at the critical moment made frame reconstruction nearly impossible. No other cameras in the area captured images of the pickup truck. Narrowing down owners of older white pickups in the Silver Spring area faced obstacles because registration records from that era did not store detailed vehicle images, and many commercial vehicles belonged to small companies or had been resold without paperwork. The witnesses who provided information from the night Jenna disappeared, the hurried footsteps, two silhouettes, the slow-moving pickup truck, could not offer specific identification or any details strong enough for prosecution. Each saw only a fragment, a sound, a vague movement in the fog. When pieced together, they formed a picture with disconnected parts, but none sharp enough to become evidence. Daniel Kerr, the first person suspected per standard procedure, was removed from the primary suspect list after the gas station camera confirmed his presence at a location several minutes' drive from the scene. Though a gap remained in his alibi, there was no basis to keep him as a suspect. He stayed in the monitoring category, but was not a lead in the case. The investigation team returned to the parking lot multiple times in the first week, sweeping it square meter by square meter, but found no footprints, drag marks, or any physical signs indicating Jenna had left her car under duress. The thick fog on the night of the incident had obscured almost every opportunity to find outdoor traces. Though the investigators did not say it aloud, everyone understood that time was always the enemy in cases like this. In the following days, they pulled records of white pickup truck owners in Milwaukee. The list was nearly 200 vehicles long, including service trucks, rentals, and personal ones. Verifying each one, without a license plate description or specific features, became a time-consuming task, nearly impossible to complete quickly. They faced difficulties gathering records because many trucks had changed hands multiple times, some had been scrapped or moved to other states. Meanwhile, no additional tip calls came in. Starting from the 5th day after Jenna's disappearance, the flow of leads began to stall. There were no further signs of her contacting anyone, no credit card activity, and her cell phone, a small early 1990s model, lacked GPS tracking or ping history, like later technology. In the second week, the investigation team was left with only a few minor leads to pursue, reanalyzing the camera footage at different speeds, trying to locate additional private cameras near the apartment complex, and sweeping the trails in the Menomonee River area for supplementary traces. But no new results emerged. Aerial searches using infrared helicopters over the wooded area also detected nothing beyond wildlife heat signatures. Each day that passed without new leads caused Jenna's case file to gradually shift from red to yellow, the color for cases showing signs of stalling. At the MPD, such files were not forgotten, but were placed below higher priority active investigations. The absence of a body or clear evidence made it impossible to confirm whether Jenna was still alive or had met with foul play. This complicated coordination with other agencies, as everything remained speculative. By the second month, most of the initial investigative directions had reached dead ends. There was insufficient evidence to prosecute anyone. No clear suspect, no legally valuable physical evidence, no DNA strong enough for comparisons. All connections pointed only to possibilities, not conclusions, and in the silence between empty reports, brief meetings, and unsuccessful sweeps, Jenna Hartley's file was gradually moved to pending review status, then a few months later officially became part of the unsolved category. The disappearance, quiet and without explosion, slowly slipped into the shadows and became a cold case. By early 2001, after nearly 3 years with no significant progress, Jenna Hartley's case file was officially transferred to the Milwaukee Police Department's Cold Case Unit. This was not an unexpected decision. Disappearances without a body, without a specific suspect, and lacking physical evidence were typically placed in the category for periodic review rather than continuous investigation. When the file was frozen, all evidence collected in 1998 was moved to storage room number 4, a small basement room where temperature and humidity were controlled, but which lacked modern analytical equipment. Among the evidence items, many DNA samples that the original team had hoped to exploit, such as the unidentified hair strand, the fabric piece with male DNA collected from Menomonee River Parkway, or the air sample with the strange odor from Jenna's car, were all deemed not yet suitable for deeper analysis, using the techniques available at the time. The 1998 lab could only compare clear high-concentration DNA samples. Degraded, fragmented or contaminated samples, like those from Jenna's case, were shelved with the note retain. This made the case nearly impossible to advance through forensics. Even Jenna's sedan, though carefully preserved, yielded nothing more. No usable strange fingerprints, no grease or foreign material sufficient to trace origins. Many small fiber traces collected from the seats and floor also could not be classified. The cold case unit, in the early 2000s, consisted of only a few part-time investigators who mainly reviewed old cases during downtime between new ones. Jenna's case became one of the review when time allows files, not a priority. However, each time the file was reopened, the team still noted and re-examined the key information. Jenna left the hospital around 11 p.m., parked in the apartment lot, vanished within minutes, and no one saw her leave in any direction. They knew about the white pickup truck that appeared behind Jenna's car, but had no further data to identify the license plate or driver. The witnesses provided vague details, but nothing changed from year to year. It was during one such random review in 2001 that a new name appeared in the hospital records, transferred along with the investigative documents: Harold Finch. His name showed up in Jenna's shift log, recorded as a patient she had cared for in the week before her disappearance. In the hospital file, Finch only provided the information every patient must supply: middle-aged, residing in Milwaukee, reason for admission a minor hand injury. Nothing unusual about the medical record, but in the shift notes the investigators obtained from the hospital, a few days after Jenna vanished, Jenna had been assigned to monitor Finch during an afternoon shift 2 days before her disappearance. The investigator in the cold case unit examined the documents and discovered that Finch disappeared from Milwaukee almost immediately after the time Jenna went missing. In the medical records, Finch's discharge date was the evening of the last time Jenna saw him at the hospital. But when police tried to trace the address Finch had provided, they found the apartment had been vacated. Neighbors didn't know who Finch was, and there were no documents proving he had actually lived there. Finch's temporary residency registration in the city system also left the Social Security number field blank, a detail no one on the original investigation team had noticed, because they were focused on the apartment complex, the sedan, and witness statements. A patient providing incomplete information wasn't rare, but when it coincided with the timing of Jenna's disappearance, the name Harold Finch should have received more attention. However, in 1998, the investigation team had no specific reason to view Finch as a threat. He wasn't on the list of Jenna's acquaintances, didn't fall into the suspect category based on statements, and there was no physical evidence tying him to the scene. The cold case unit tried to locate Finch a few weeks later, but all they found was a string of empty data, no utility bills, no employment records, no rental history, no vehicle registration, no tax system entries. It was as if Finch had only appeared for a short time, been admitted to the hospital, left, and then vanished into nothing. With no direct connecting evidence, the investigation team filed Finch's name under review when additional information becomes available, but could not expand the investigation further. In the following months, the file was only opened a few times to check for any similar disappearances. There were none. Better cameras had not yet been installed at the apartment complex, and no additional leads were provided by the public. Jenna's case had no answers, no progress, and no new approaches. By mid-2001, the case was officially frozen under MPD regulations. Jenna's file, over 300 pages thick, was labeled cold case and placed on shelf number 14, alongside hundreds of other unsolved cases. The sealed evidence items were placed in storage boxes, with a simple label on the outside: Hartley, Jenna, missing person, 1998. No one on the investigation team at the time knew that the name Harold Finch, appearing quietly in a few lines of hospital records, would resurface many years later. But in 2001, with limited tools and resources, no one had the ability to track a person who had disappeared from Milwaukee, leaving almost no trace. From 2010 to 2014, the Milwaukee Police Department launched a program to review backlog cases older than 10 years, in which the Cold Case Review Board, a group consisting of veteran investigators, forensic experts, retired officers, and legal advisors, was tasked with examining a total of 86 unsolved files, including disappearances without bodies. The goal was not to reopen all of them, but to identify cases with untapped details or potential for applying new forensic technology. Jenna Hartley's file was among those brought to the review table in late 2011. In the first meeting about Jenna's file, the investigators spread out all the documents on the table: photos of the sedan in the parking lot, maps of the Menomonee River Parkway trails, witness sketches of the two silhouettes, photographs of the fabric scraps, the hair collected from the car, and copies of the 8-second camera footage. Everything had faded with time. Looking at the file, many members of the Cold Case Review Board commented that the case had clearly unusual elements, but all of them were at the level of possibility, with no evidence coming close to certainty. When the list of individuals in the file was reviewed name by name, the youngest investigator in the group came across Harold Finch and asked whether he had ever been thoroughly investigated. Some of the older investigators vaguely remembered that the name had been mentioned during the initial process, but there was no indication he was involved. They pulled the hospital records again and cross-referenced them with discharge logs for patients in the week Jenna disappeared. The name Finch appeared only twice, on the list of patients Jenna was responsible for, and in the shift log where she signed to confirm she had checked his wound the afternoon before. Per the review team's protocol, any name appearing in the documents, but not fully investigated, had to be re-examined. The investigator handling background research began checking Wisconsin resident databases, tax records, voter registration, census data, and criminal lookup systems, but every search for Harold Finch led to the same results as in 2001: nothing. No residential address, no credit history, no tax filings, no vehicle registration, no record of using identification after 1998. Finch seemed to have vanished right after discharge, leaving no administrative trace. The investigators tried to revisit the address Finch had provided to the hospital in 1998, a third-floor apartment in a building on the west side of the city. When an officer was sent to check, the current landlord said the unit had had at least 4 different tenants from 1999 to 2010, and they had no records of prior renters. There was no lease in the name of Harold Finch, no copies of identification, and no one remembered ever meeting a man by that name. Even when they asked long-term neighbors in the area, no one recognized the name. The Cold Case Review Board considered the hypothesis that Finch might have been transient, but even transients usually leave small traces in the system: utility bills, secondary medical records, public service registrations. Finch did not. No banking activity, no employment records, no vehicle paperwork, no license applications. Even the hospital record where he was treated contained only minimal information, and the contact phone number listed had been disconnected since 1999. When they called to trace it, the phone company said the number had never belonged to a customer named Harold Finch. A veteran investigator suggested checking whether the name might be an alias, but when cross-referencing the data, there was not enough personal information to determine Finch's true identity. False address, false phone number, and the date of birth listed on the hospital record may have been provided verbally without verification. When they tried to trace it through the health insurance code Finch had provided, they discovered it did not match any code in the Wisconsin system at that time. Using an incorrect insurance code sometimes happened with patients unprepared with paperwork, but when combined with all the other data, it became a clear anomaly. Finch left no basis for existence beyond his single hospital admission. One member of the Cold Case Review Board pointed out a detail: the 1995 disappearance, the female victim who vanished at Menomonee River Parkway, also had an unusual data point involving an unidentified patient who appeared in the emergency room on the day the case was reported. But the patient's name in the 1995 case did not match Finch. Nevertheless, this made the group feel the need to more closely examine the possibility of someone using false identities to appear and disappear around the times of the disappearances. Even though the name Finch resurfaced during the 2010-2014 period, Jenna's file still lacked grounds to reopen the investigation. There was no evidence tying Finch to the case. It was impossible to determine whether he was involved or if it was mere coincidence. There was no way to follow the trail because the man had left Wisconsin right after Jenna disappeared, and all data about him stopped completely from that day. The younger investigators wanted to dig deeper, but the veteran members understood the limits of a cold case lacking forensics, additional witnesses, and administrative traces to track. In the end, in the review minutes, the review board added one line to the persons for further review section: Harold Finch, insufficient information, unable to verify identity, no further activity data, after 1998. Jenna's file was closed after the meeting, and Finch, though mentioned for the first time in nearly 13 years, still left no trace that could actually be followed. For nearly a decade after the 2010-2014 review wave, Jenna Hartley's file went quiet again, only opened when the cold case unit performed periodic checks. No new reports, no additional witnesses, no new evidence, and no progress related to the name Harold Finch. But in 2019, an event occurring more than 1,000 miles from Milwaukee unexpectedly brought Jenna's file back into the light, not because a new piece was found in Wisconsin, but because of an identity fraud case discovered in Montana. The incident began when the Montana DMV was upgrading to the Real ID system, requiring cross-checking of all driver's license renewal applications against the federal Death Master file. During the sweep, one name stood out: Elliot Thomas Graff. According to original records, Elliot Graff was born in 1953 and died in 1976 in a traffic accident in Arkansas. But the system showed Graff had renewed his license in Montana multiple times after 2000, most recently in 2019. This was an impossible contradiction. The DMV initially thought it was a data entry error, but when cross-checked against the national death file, they confirmed the real Elliot Graff had indeed died in 1976, with a fully valid death certificate. Meanwhile, the person living in Montana, under that name, had used legal documents for nearly 4 decades without detection. The case was immediately transferred to the DMV's fraud unit and then forwarded to the Social Security Administration, SSA, for deeper investigation. The SSA investigators started by examining the activity records of Elliot Graff in Montana. The records showed Graff lived in an extremely remote area on the edge of the Madison Range Mountains, near the northern boundary of Yellowstone. His registered address was an old cabin on nearly 50 acres of land. He had no banking loan history, no complex tax records, no vehicle ownership beyond a 1994 older pickup truck, and virtually no credit footprint. All financial activity revolved around purchasing fuel, home repair tools, survival gear, and essentials from a few local stores. When the SSA checked the social security number this person used, they discovered it had been issued to the real Elliot Graff, but showed no activity after his death, until 1984, when the record reappeared with an address in Arkansas, then years later moved to New Mexico, and finally to Montana. Any tax filings, if present, were minimal or non-existent, making tracing nearly impossible. The person using the name Graff avoided credit cards, used only cash, and never left any electronic records. When SSA investigators contacted residents around the cabin area to ask about Graff, they described the same type of person, a reclusive man who avoided social interaction, did not participate in the community, and only came to town when needing essentials. No one knew what he did for a living, or where he came from. Neighbors all said the same thing. He lived like he didn't want anyone to remember he existed. There were no official photos of Graff, except a blurry one on the Montana DMV-issued license, taken in 2014. The image showed a gray-haired man with uneven beard, gaunt face, and eyes avoiding the camera. The SSA investigator, following procedure, tried matching the license photo against other federal photo databases, but found no results. No one resembled him, no prior data, and no signs linking him to a real identity. This person had clearly lived under the name Elliot Graff for at least 40 years, but the biggest question was who was he before using that name? During the review of the Social Security numbers movement history, one detail caught the SSA investigators' particular attention. Before moving to New Mexico, and then Montana, Elliot Graff had been present in Wisconsin in the late 1990s. More precisely, a temporary tax record showed a single entry in 1998, a short-term address in Milwaukee. At that moment, the investigator paused longer than usual in front of the screen. The year 1998, the year Jenna Hartley disappeared. The Milwaukee address, only a few blocks from Jenna's apartment complex, and most importantly, no records of Graff before 1984, yet he was in the city during the exact period a serious cold case occurred. The SSA investigator continued digging into the Milwaukee data, and discovered that the address listed in the 1998 tax record belonged to an old apartment complex that had been demolished in 2007. Some documents from that time showed no one remembered Graff ever living there, nor was there any rental record, but the name and address still appeared in that year's tax data as a temporary mailing address. The development prompted the SSA investigator to immediately forward all the information to the MPD under federal data sharing protocols. Among the cold cases in Milwaukee, only one 1998 disappearance occurred in the area matching that address. Jenna Hartley's case. That was the first time the MPD saw the name Elliot Graff. When the cold case unit received the documents from the SSA, they matched the new information with the old file. One investigator immediately recognized the familiarity. Graff appeared in Milwaukee in 1998, the time Jenna disappeared. Harold Finch, the mysterious patient Jenna had cared for, also vanished at exactly that time. And since the year Jenna went missing, no further activity related to Finch appeared, just like how Graff left no trace before 1984. The similarities in the pattern of disappearance, living outside the system, and blank records for both men raised questions for the cold case unit. No one said it outright, but in brief meetings, the investigators all noted, two men, Finch and Graff, both lacked records of existence before and after key milestones, and one had lived right in Milwaukee the year Jenna vanished. No one at the time knew whether Finch and Graff were the same person, but this was the first time, after many years of the case falling silent, that a new piece of data emerged beyond Wisconsin's borders. A man living deep in the mountains of Montana, bearing the name of a dead person who had lived in Milwaukee the year Jenna disappeared, and no one knew his real name. The Montana DMV's discovery that Elliot Graff was using the identity of a deceased person was only the beginning. The event that truly triggered the federal investigation process occurred in 2019, when Graf applied for a driver's license renewal under the requirements of the Real ID system, a nationwide program to strengthen identity verification. Before this point, Graf had renewed his license multiple times over the years, without issues, because cross-checking against the federal Death Master file was not yet tightly linked to state licensing systems. But in October 2019, when Graf submitted his renewal request, the name and social security number he used were immediately flagged red by the automated system. Within minutes of Graf's file entering the processing queue, the software detected a severe mismatch. The social security number he used matched someone reported deceased in 1976. The system marked the file at the highest alert level, as this type of anomaly often involved identity fraud, tax evasion, or fake documents. The alert record was sent simultaneously to 3 units: Montana DMV, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS Identity Verification Division, and the Social Security Administration Fraud Unit, the agency with the deepest investigative authority in such cases. When the file reached the SSA Fraud Unit, the on-duty staff quickly assessed the severity. The automated report described the entire pattern of Elliot Graf identity usage from 1984 to 2019, very small tax filings, reported addresses shifting between Arkansas, New Mexico, and Montana, no clear employers, no banking loan history, and no signs of a normally active citizen. The data silence made Graf's file even more suspicious, because most people using deceased identities typically left clearer financial traces. But Graf did not. He lived almost entirely outside the system, leaving only small cash transactions. Under standard procedure, when an identity fraud file is flagged, the SSA must investigate within 90 days. However, 2019 coincided with a time when the SSA Fraud Unit was under heavy pressure due to a sudden surge in backlog cases. Thousands of suspected cases, involving deceased SSNs, tax evasion, medical claim fraud, benefit scams, all flooded in at once. The investigation team was short-staffed while the Real ID system kept adding more alerts. Graf was not the only red-flagged case. He was just one of hundreds of names appearing in monthly reports. In December 2019, Graf's file was compiled into a fraud packet, a preliminary fraud investigation file, and ranked medium priority because there were no signs of large transactions, no reported damages, and no refund requests or complaints from any organization. Graf did not borrow money, did not apply for government benefits, and caused no losses to any entity. For prioritization, the SSA Fraud Unit typically handled high financial damage cases first, so Graf's file was pushed down. In early 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the SSA backlog reached unprecedented levels. Thousands of unemployment fraud, benefit scams, relief exploitation, tax evasion overwhelmed the organization. Graf's file was delayed further, and because he lived completely isolated, filed no taxes, applied for no aid, and conducted no suspicious transactions, his file was not reactivated. The assigned staff only noted that Graf might be living off the grid, and such cases usually did not require urgent handling unless other criminal activity was involved. In 2021 and 2022, the file was only checked periodically, every 6 months, as part of the protocol for reviewing red flag data. Each review confirmed Graf showed up in no other databases, no new tax filings, no death report, no address changes, no banking transactions, no new activity to trigger investigation. The SSA investigator noted subject inactive, a term for individuals leaving no electronic footprint. Many such files were suspended indefinitely, because the agency lacked resources to investigate someone with virtually no impact on the system. By 2023, the backlog at the SSA reached record highs. Fraud cases pending from 2018-2020 were moved to the extended review category, meaning very low likelihood of immediate processing. Graf was in this group. Without any unusual signals, the file could remain suspended for decades. During this time, no one knew that the name Graf had appeared in Milwaukee in 1998. There was no reason for the SSA investigator to cross-reference this file with the MPD database, or with any cases outside Montana. No one knew he had ever been connected to a city halfway across the country, and no one knew the name Harold Finch existed in Jenna's missing person file. The two names stood in completely separate places, belonging to two data systems that did not intersect, one in a 1998 Wisconsin hospital record, the other in a 2019 Montana identity fraud record. In the years that followed, whenever periodic monitoring took place, Graff's file would be opened for a few minutes, and then closed again. There was no new activity to flag. The cabin where he lived had no internet, no electric bills, no propane registration, no trash collection records. All the usual data points used to track an individual simply did not exist. This made him, in the eyes of the SSA, no different from hundreds of isolated individuals living in the mountains of Montana or Wyoming. If no other event had occurred, Graff's file might have remained forever in the SSA fraud unit's unresolved list. But in reality, the existence of a person using a deceased individual's SSN for 40 years without leaving traces, combined with the Real ID system repeatedly flagging it red, meant Graff's file could not be deleted or set aside. It stayed in the queue, not prioritized, but never disappearing. It was that persistent existence, quiet, unremarkable, causing no damage, yet impossible to ignore, that kept Graff's file in the system for years. By early 2025, most of the backlogged identity fraud files at the SSA fraud unit were assigned to a new team of staff members. Among them was a young investigator tasked with reviewing long-flagged red cases that had never been fully processed. Their goal was not to resolve everything, but to reclassify cases for dismissal, archiving, or further investigation activation. The Elliot Graff file was in the first batch reviewed. The investigator opened Graff's file without expecting anything special. Most of the documents showed a familiar pattern: a reclusive man using a deceased person's identity, no interaction with the financial system, no material harm. But while scrolling through the historical addresses section, the investigator came across the only entry related to Wisconsin, Milwaukee, 1998. It was just a blank line, listed as a temporary address, with no rental details, no bills, no phone number. But a simple question popped into the young investigator's mind: why would someone as anonymous as Graff, who had lived off the grid for decades, appear in a major city like Milwaukee in 1998? The investigator opened the federal cross-data tool, used to query personal records against state-specific notable events. When entering Milwaukee plus 1998 plus missing persons, the system automatically displayed a list of disappearances and criminal incidents from that year. In that list, Jenna Hartley's name was marked as one of Wisconsin's prominent 1998 missing persons cases. The investigator had no reason to connect the two names, Graff and Jenna, but professional instinct led him to open Jenna's file to check if the timelines overlapped. Jenna's file showed she disappeared in early November 1998. Graff's tax record noted the Milwaukee address registered in the same month. Though the data was not enough for a conclusion, the timing coincidence caught the investigator's attention. He continued reviewing the attached documents, which included a list of people Jenna had contact with at the hospital in the week before she vanished. He scrolled down the list, and stopped when he saw the name Harold Finch. The name appeared in the file as a patient Jenna had been responsible for before her disappearance. The investigator immediately opened the federal database entry for Finch. Searching Harold Finch returned very few results, just as the MPD had noted years earlier. But in a scanned copy from the 1998 Wisconsin hospital record, there was a blurry photo of Finch taken during admission. The image was not sharp: a middle-aged man with dark hair streaked with gray, slightly sunken cheeks, gaze averted from the camera. But the investigator noticed one notable point: the facial structure, the jawline, nose bridge, eye placement, had something similar to the 2014 photo on Elliot Graff's driver's license. He decided to take the next step, requesting the system to compare the two images using facial recognition analysis. The tool scanned 63 facial landmarks and produced a result that made the investigator double-check 94% match between Harold Finch, 1998 photo, and Elliot Graff, 2014 photo. Despite the 16-year gap and clear signs of aging, the algorithm assessed that the two were almost certainly the same individual. The investigator immediately reported the discovery to the team leader. Within less than an hour, an internal report was forwarded to the SSA Fraud Field Office and the DHS Identity Integrity Division. Both agencies simultaneously requested verification of the source data from Wisconsin. Had Harold Finch truly disappeared from the state right after Jenna went missing? When the federal system linked to the MPD database, the answer appeared clearly. Finch had no activity in Wisconsin systems after November 1998. No rental records, no vehicle registration, no property transactions, no medical service usage. Finch vanished completely from the state the same week Jenna disappeared. At this point, the link between the two identities, Finch and Graff, was strong enough to move to federal-state coordination. A high-priority alert was sent to the Milwaukee Cold Case Unit, marking the matter as federal file, requiring cross-reference with pending disappearance. In the document to the MPD, the SSA outlined 3 points. 1. Elliot Graff is using the identity of a deceased person. 2. This individual was present in Milwaukee during the exact month Jenna Hartley disappeared. 3. Photos of Graff and Harold Finch show a high match, likely the same person. When the Milwaukee Cold Case Unit opened the email, many investigators felt as if they were reading a name buried far too long ago. Harold Finch, the figure who had only appeared in a few brief lines of hospital records, was now returning through an entirely different path, from a distant state, and through an identity fraud case no one could have foreseen. The Cold Case Unit held an emergency meeting that same day. On the projector screen, the two photos, Finch from 1998 and Graff from 2014, were placed side by side. On paper, they were two different people, two names, two addresses, two backgrounds with no documented overlap. But in the images, the facial features told a different story. The veteran investigators who had worked Jenna's case in 1998 nearly stood up when they saw the 94% match. For them, this was the first time in 27 years a real lid had emerged, not based on speculation, not on witness memories, not on scattered fragments that couldn't be pieced together. Just hours after cross-verification, the MPD officially submitted a request for federal assistance to locate Elliot Graff, suspected to be the false identity of Harold Finch. This automatically triggered the protocol to reopen the cold case, a step no one in the Cold Case Unit thought would happen after nearly 3 decades. That day, in the MPD system, Jenna Hartley's file status changed from Cold Case, Archived, to Cold Case, Active Review. It was the first change to the file in 27 years, and the moment the disappearance, long thought buried in the past, was officially reopened. Immediately after the Milwaukee Cold Case Unit formally reopened Jenna's case and submitted the federal assistance request, the task was transferred to the FBI field office in Helena, Montana, the unit responsible for the area where Elliot Graff resided. The initial file the FBI received contained only 3 key facts. Graff was using the identity of a deceased person. Graff had lived in Milwaukee the year Jenna Hartley disappeared, and Graff's photo matched 94% with the 1998 photo of patient Harold Finch. Based on the severity of this information, the FBI decided to initiate covert surveillance under protocols for subjects potentially linked to serious criminal cases. The property where Graff lived was deep in the Madison Range Mountains, difficult to access, with the approach road just a nearly 2-mile dirt and rock path. His cabin had no public electricity, relied on a private generator, and had no internet signal. To avoid detection, the FBI did not approach the cabin immediately, but deployed long-range surveillance, small drones, thermal cameras, and night vision devices, positioned on high points along the mountainside. In the early days, drones were flown while it was still dark, to prevent light reflecting off the wings and revealing their position. Graff's cabin sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by trees, making it hard to observe with the naked eye, but thermal cameras showed consistent heat signatures from the cabin, indicating someone inside, the generator running, and the stove in use. They recorded his daily routine, waking early, frequently moving between the cabin and a small shed behind it, occasionally going to the river for water, sometimes taking long walks along the mountainside as if patrolling the area. In the second week of surveillance, the FBI noticed something unusual. The shed behind the cabin showed higher than normal heat signatures, not consistent with storage for tools or food. Thermal cameras captured large hot spots in the elongated block shapes, typically seen when thick metal absorbs heat, such as guns or ammunition containers. For confirmation, a drone flew lower at dusk and photographed through a slightly open door crack. The image was blurry but clear enough for analysts to identify multiple long objects aligned parallel on wall racks, shapes consistent with rifles or shotguns. The next day, when a drone approached from another angle, the zoom camera captured it more clearly: at least 7 rifles, 2 shotguns, and several large ammunition crates stacked in the corner of the shed. An FBI weapons expert reviewed the images and determined the designs matched military surplus models, or those sold on the civilian market from the early 2000s. Additionally, they spotted one rifle with a long scope, capable of accurate long-range shooting. For the FBI, owning a large arsenal did not automatically mean criminal activity, especially in Montana, where many residents kept substantial hunting firearms. But in the case of someone under investigation for using a deceased person's identity, and with a potential link to an unsolved disappearance in another state, possessing an arsenal of this scale was strong enough reason to elevate the subject's risk level significantly. After establishing Graff's routine, the FBI moved to the next step, collecting DNA from discarded waste. Since the cabin was far from populated areas, no garbage trucks came, but Graff still handled trash by burning some and hauling the rest to a temporary dump site in the woods. Through drone observation, the FBI identified an area about 200 meters from the cabin where Graff regularly left trash bags before burning them. They decided to access this site at night. 2 agents entered the woods under complete darkness, using night vision gear and maintaining safe distance to avoid detection. The temporary dump site contained only a few torn old cloth bags, tin cans and wrappers. Among them, the agents found a small black plastic comb with several blonde hairs caught between the teeth. What they noted immediately: Graff had mostly gray hair in recent photos. Finch in 1998 also did not have blonde hair, but the hair strand from Jenna's car evidence collected in 1998 was a similar light color. The evidence was sealed and sent immediately to the FBI lab. Because DNA technology in 2025 far surpassed that of 1998, they could isolate trace sequences from the hair even after time degradation. The lab conducted analysis in 2 phases, comparing color and fiber structure, then running mitochondrial DNA to determine similarity levels. Less than 3 days later, the results came back. The hair sample from the Montana dump site and the hair found in Jenna's car in 1998 matched in structural characteristics at 99.2%. Because the 1998 sample had degraded, some deeper markers could not be determined, but this match level was sufficient to conclude the 2 hairs very likely belonged to the same person. When the Milwaukee Cold Case Unit received the FBI report, they reviewed the original 1998 evidence log. In the description of items collected from Jenna's car, the investigator had noted clearly: 1 light-colored hair, not belonging to Jenna, recovered from the dashboard area. Though deeper analysis was impossible at the time, they knew it was key evidence. Now, after 27 years, the FBI lab had proven that someone left a trace in Jenna's car, and that person exists today under the false name Elliot Graff. This DNA match was not enough for charges, but sufficient for the FBI to upgrade the subject from surveillance per request to high-risk individual. For the first time, evidence from 1998 directly connected to a biological sample discarded by the person currently living as Graff. In the internal report sent back to Milwaukee, the FBI noted one critical line: biological trace match found. Subject Graff likely present in victim's vehicle. Hartley, Jenna, 1998. The Cold Case Unit, after nearly 3 decades without finding any thread connecting Jenna's case to a living person, now had a real forensic link. Not a statement, not speculation, not blurry camera footage. DNA, even from just a single hair, had for the first time placed Elliot Graff back at the center of the Jenna Hartley case. When the Montana DNA report was forwarded to Milwaukee, the cold case unit immediately began the next critical step, reconstructing the full timeline of Harold Finch's movements in the days before and after Jenna Hartley disappeared in November 1998. Because if Graff truly was Finch, then any surviving records from that period could reveal what he did, and more importantly, when he left the city. A team specializing in financial records and old data was mobilized to hunt for any remaining traces of Finch. Most administrative records from the 1990s had been digitized or stored on microfilm, and investigators had to search through thousands of entries. After hours of review, they uncovered something significant. Finch's discharge record listed November 3, 1998. According to hospital logs, Jenna checked his wound the afternoon of November 2. She vanished the night of November 3. Thus, Finch's discharge date aligned almost perfectly with the time Jenna disappeared. When cross-referencing the address Finch provided with any activity in the following week, they found nothing. No utility bills, no store transactions, no sign of Finch's social security number used in any system after Jenna went missing. But when expanding to bank records, they found the first clue, a small account Finch opened at a local bank in 1997, which had only sporadic small deposits. For the 3 months leading up to Jenna's disappearance, the account showed no activity. But exactly 1 day after Jenna was reported missing, November 4, the remaining balance, about $300, was withdrawn in full at an ATM in West Milwaukee. The timeline began to sharpen. 11 halves, Finch saw Jenna at the hospital. 11 thirds, Jenna disappeared that evening. 11 quarters, Finch emptied the account and vanished from Milwaukee. When mapping the ATM location against 1998 traffic patterns, investigators realized the ATM was just 1 block from the road where the white pickup truck appeared on camera. This did not prove Finch drove the truck, but it placed him in extremely close proximity, closer than anyone else in the file. The cold case unit expanded the search by tracing records of vehicles sold without paperwork, since the white pickup on camera had no clear plate. One investigator located a 1999 report from a small junkyard on the outskirts of Milwaukee. The report noted an older white pickup sold for cash, no registration paperwork, no valid VIN due to wear. The seller provided the name H. Finch. Sale date November 5, 1998, 36 hours after Jenna was last seen. The scattered points began to form a pattern. Finch discharged just before Jenna vanished, disappeared right after the night she went missing, emptied his account, sold a white pickup matching witness and camera descriptions, and never returned to Wisconsin. As investigators continued searching for any other travel data, they uncovered one more faint trace in federal tax records. A temporary P.O. box opened under Harold Finch in mid-1998 at a post office near Jenna's residential area. After November 1998, the P.O. box was closed, and Finch's name never appeared in Wisconsin postal systems again. The Milwaukee Cold Case Unit then requested FBI assistance in cross-referencing movement maps and the scattered 1998 documents. The FBI used behavioral reconstruction software based on patterns of anonymous subjects. The algorithm analyzed timing, locations, and Finch's last recorded actions, then compared them to the positions where Jenna's car and the white pickup appeared on camera. The results revealed something highly significant. Finch's final known locations, per ATM and junkyard records, aligned exactly with the area where camera footage captured Jenna turning in, and the white pickup appearing in the final 8 seconds. Same intersection, same time frame, same night. Investigators re-examined the camera footage to determine if Finch could be in the frame. Though the footage was too blurry to see the truck driver, the height and size of the vehicle matched the type Finch sold. All of this led to an unofficial conclusion in the working file. Harold Finch was present in the area where Jenna disappeared during the critical time frame, and his financial behavior indicated an urgent flight immediately after the event. One more piece sharpened the picture when the FBI cross-referenced timelines. they discovered Finch purchased a long-distance bus ticket in Chicago on November 6, just 2 days after emptying his account. The route led to New Mexico, where Elliot Graff first appeared in tax records in 1999. There was no video from the old bus station, but the departure time, seat number, and route aligned almost perfectly with Graff's trail. At this point, the cold case unit had 4 key milestones. 1. Finch left Milwaukee within 36 hours of Jenna's disappearance. 2. He sold a white pickup matching witness and camera descriptions. 3. The bank account was emptied immediately after the event. 4. Finch's final location matched exactly the area where the pickup appeared on camera. With the data reorganized chronologically, the 1998 timeline was no longer fragmented. A man discharged from the hospital, met Jenna days earlier, vanished at the same time the disappearance occurred, sold a vehicle without paperwork, emptied his money, and fled the state immediately. Each individual fact was not enough for charges, but together they formed a unified chain of behavior consistent with someone attempting to erase traces. This was the first time in 27 years the investigation team had a coherent, unified timeline for Harold Finch, the man who had once been just a faint name in hospital records, but now stood at the center of the 1998 Jenna Hartley story. After reconstructing the 1998 timeline and cross-referencing all interstate data, the FBI assessed the risk level of Elliot Graff, aka Harold Finch, as escalating to armed subject likely to resist. The arsenal discovered via drone, decades of mysterious existence, and potential connection to an unsolved disappearance, required coordination with the U.S. Marshals to execute a containment operation under protocols for dangerous subjects hiding in rugged terrain. The plan was deployed in the early morning of mid-March, when temperatures remained cold and sparse snow covered the ground. The location, a narrow valley in the Madison Ridge area, more than a dozen miles from the nearest settlement, gave the FBI an advantage: no civilians in the operational zone, no easy escape routes, and all movements observable from high points. But the steep terrain, dense pine forest, and rough mountainsides also demanded careful planning. A subject with a long-range scope and wilderness survival experience could turn the entire area into a trap. At 4:12 a.m., the FBI tactical team, coordinated with U.S. Marshals, quietly approached 3 points around the cabin. Drones were deployed from the east, flying low along the treetops, continuously transmitting images of the cabin and weapons shed. Thermal signatures showed the subject was awake, an unfavorable development. A single figure moved inside, faint light spilling from a small window. Finch might have heard something in the woods, or he simply had a habit of rising early. Whatever the reason, his alertness forced the FBI to adjust the approach. At the northern point, the U.S. Marshals team set up sniper overwatch to secure the forward units. From the south and west, 2 FBI teams advanced step by step through the forest, maintaining absolute silence. Dry snow muffled footsteps, but snapping branches could still give away positions. The operation commander decided to wait until the drone confirmed the subject had not changed location. But at exactly 4:47 a.m., while it was still dark, a gunshot tore through the silence. A round fired into the air, not aimed at any agent, but loud enough to halt all advance. It was a warning shot. An agent watching through the drone camera saw Finch standing on the cabin porch, scoped rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning directly eastward. He said nothing, just stood there for a few seconds before stepping back inside. Clearly, he knew people were in the woods. Perhaps he heard the drone, or survival instinct made him wary. The gunshot forced the FBI commander to activate the clear call negotiation protocol. A portable loudspeaker was positioned at the forest edge, and the negotiator's voice rang out, "Mr. Graff, or Harold Finch, we are the FBI and U.S. Marshals. You are surrounded. No one wants to cause harm. Put down your weapons and step out of the cabin." No response. 1 minute passed, then 5 minutes. The drone held high position, monitoring the door. No movement. The negotiator continued. "We know you have lived here for many years. We are not here to hurt you. Cooperate and everything will be resolved safely." You have no way to leave this area. A moment later, the cabin door rattled slightly, but instead of stepping out, Finch fired another round, this time striking a tree about 30 meters from the nearest FBI position. No one was injured, but it was a clear message he would not surrender easily. Negotiations shifted to a more intense phase. They extended the loudspeaker broadcasts, with the investigator reading out the name Harold Finch, the 1998 Milwaukee hospital details, his discharge timing, and his use of the false identity, Elliot Graff. The goal was to make him understand they knew who he was. This could trigger a defensive reaction, but it might also make him pause if he felt cornered. Inside the cabin, through thermal imaging, the figure moved constantly. He went from door to door, sometimes standing still for long periods as if listening. By 6 a.m., negotiations had lasted nearly 2 hours with no progress. Dawn was breaking, and that worried the FBI. Finch could use the light to pinpoint unit positions from afar, if he employed his long-range scope. At 6:28 a.m., a small change occurred. Finch opened the cabin door for a few seconds, standing just inside the threshold, without firing. The negotiator immediately responded, "Harold, we are not coming in. We just want you to step out unarmed. Let us end this safely." The door closed again, but at 7:03 a.m., when the drone shifted westward, the camera detected it. Finch was no longer in the cabin. His heat signature appeared near the shed. The tactical team immediately recognized the risk. The shed contained the weapons. If Finch barricaded himself there, the situation would escalate to a new level of danger. The negotiator changed tactics. "Harold, we know you are at the shed. No one wants to shoot. Step out, hands raised. No weapon. You choose how this ends." A silence stretched on, seemingly endless. 7:11 a.m. The shed door creaked open. Finch stepped out, slowly, heavily, his gray hair disheveled, the scoped rifle slung over his right shoulder. He didn't raise his hands. He just stood there, staring straight into the forest where he knew people were watching. Assault agents from 3 sides immediately sighted in, snipers on the ridge locked on target. One unusual movement, and gunfire would be unavoidable. The negotiator lowered his voice, steady and slow. "Harold, put the rifle down. No one wants you hurt." Finch gripped the rifle strap tightly. No movement. 40 seconds passed in complete silence. Then, an almost unpredictable moment, he slowly removed the rifle from his shoulder, set it on the ground, nudged it forward with his foot, and raised both hands high. An agent shouted, "Subject surrendering. Approach." The tactical teams rushed to their designated positions. They cuffed him, conducted a quick pat-down, and moved him to a clearing for safety. Finch offered no resistance, said nothing, just stared at the ground. His face was older than the driver's license photo, gaunt and weathered, but the jawline, nose bridge and facial structure still matched the 1998 Milwaukee hospital image. As he was escorted to the staging area, an FBI agent handling preliminary identification opened a tablet, flipping between the 1998 Finch photo and the 2014 Graff photo. Visual comparison was nearly sufficient for confirmation, but they followed protocol, scanned Finch's face and ran the recognition algorithm on site. The result appeared in under 3 seconds. Match found, 97.8% Finch, Harold. The FBI noted in the report, surrendering subject armed with scoped rifle, direct identification, Harold Finch, using false identity Elliot Graff. After 27 years since the day Harold Finch was discharged from the Milwaukee hospital and vanished silently from Wisconsin, he had finally been arrested, not in a city street, but on a remote Montana mountainside, surrounded by pine forest and cold snow, where he thought no one could ever find him. But the hair in Jenna's car, the blurry 8-second camera footage, the 1998 timeline, and a chain of data spanning multiple states had led everyone to the exact spot where he surrendered that morning. Immediately after Harold Finch was escorted from the Madison Ridge area, the FBI's Evidence Response Team (ERT) sealed off the entire cabin and the weapons shed behind it. While U.S. Marshals transported Finch to a temporary interrogation point, the ERT began the most critical phase of the investigation, collecting evidence inside the place Finch had lived for years, a space that might hold the answers Milwaukee had sought for nearly 3 decades. The cabin was small, but its thick wooden structure and multiple repairs required cautious entry. As with any potential crime scene, investigators entered wearing booties, blue light scanners, thermal detectors, and body cameras to document the entire condition. Right in the main room, they discovered the first thing that made the entire team pause and look at each other: a black notebook, old and dusty, placed on a shelf by the window. The ERT did not touch it immediately, but used a specialized tool to gently flip the cover. The writing on the first page left everyone speechless for several seconds. Frode. Shift. Log. The 2nd of November 1998. Nurse. J. Hartley. It was Jenna's shift log, the one Milwaukee PD believed had been lost since 1998. The cover was slightly torn, but the handwriting inside, slender, lightly slanted to the right, matched Jenna's samples in the file. One page was marked with faded, dried tape. Under patient notes, it read, "Finch. Dressing change afternoon check discomfort reported." No one in the cabin needed further explanation. Finch had kept this notebook for 27 years. Its presence in his home was an extremely significant piece of evidence, not only linking Finch to Jenna, but proving he intentionally retained an item connected to her. The ERT immediately sealed the notebook, placing it in a separate priority-coded box. The second discovery was on a small table beside the fireplace, a silver necklace. The forensic light reflected off the pendant, making it gleam. When brought closer, an agent recognized a small heart engraved with JH. Milwaukee PD had confirmed in the 1998 file that Jenna often wore a silver necklace with a pendant engraved with her initials, a birthday gift from her mother. When Jenna disappeared, the necklace was not found on her body, in her car, or in her apartment. Now it lay in Finch's cabin, thousands of miles from Milwaukee. Over 2 decades later, the ERT photographed it from 4 angles, measured dimensions, and scanned for residues before collection. The pendant showed slight tarnish, but the chain remained intact. This went far beyond coincidence. A personal item like this could only have reached Finch in 2 ways. Jenna gave it to him, or he took it the night she vanished. The third discovery made the atmosphere inside the cabin heavy. On the north wall, beneath an old Montana map, was a Milwaukee map pinned densely with metal pushpins. The investigators approached closely, wearing thick gloves. The map was not a common commercial type. It was printed in 1996, the paper yellowed with age. On the map, 5 locations were marked in red ink, each numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When the Milwaukee Cold Case Unit was called in for quick cross-reference, they recognized that the location numbered 5 was Silver Spring Drive, where Jenna vanished. Locations 1 and 2 corresponded to 2 women's disappearances in 1995 and 1993, a few miles from where Jenna went missing, the exact 2 cases the FBI had mentioned in the early investigation years, but lacked evidence to connect. Locations 3 and 4 did not match immediately, but when coordinates were entered into the old system, they aligned with 2 missing hiker cases on the Menomonee River Parkway Trail, occurring 4 years apart. The map also had a pencil circle around the Menomonee River Parkway area, the exact spot where the ERT had once found fabric scraps and evidence in Jenna's case. It could not be confirmed that Finch was responsible for the 1993 and 1995 cases, but clearly he had been interested in, monitored, or studied them. The map sheet was sealed and placed under high-value evidence. When shifting to examine the cabin's wooden floor, an agent noticed a slight unevenness when stepping across the room corner. Using a device to measure voids beneath the floor, they detected uneven echoes, signs of a hidden space. The ART used specialized tools to remove floorboards without damaging the structure. Beneath the wood was a hollow compartment the size of half the room, not noted in old cabin blueprints. Stepping down, they shone forensic lights. Dust lay thick, but in the compartment corner was a long metal trunk, locked with a rusted steel latch. When opened, they found an old women's wool jacket, torn at the shoulder, a pair of small women's athletic shoes, 1990s style, a plastic bag containing 2 torn fabric pieces, an old Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department case folder from 1995. The Milwaukee investigator, who had worked the 1995 disappearance early in his career, stood still for several seconds. The folder bore the name of the 1995 missing victim, a 27-year-old woman who vanished while jogging on the trail near Menomonee River Parkway. The case had once believed the victim was attacked, but could not identify the perpetrator due to no body and no leads. Now, in the hidden compartment of a Montana cabin, over 2,000 miles from Wisconsin, lay evidence from the 1995 disappearance, a case that had troubled Milwaukee PD for years. The ERT collected each item, photographed, measured, numbered, and sealed meticulously. Notably, the 1995 jacket still retained tears and stains, matching the scene description from that year, recorded as missing with the victim. The presence of these items in Finch's cabin reinforced a critical point. He had retained evidence related to the disappearances for years, behavior often seen in trophy retention by serial offenders. In the same hidden compartment, another item made the forensic team pause for careful examination. An old roll of paper, tied with thin rope. When unrolled, inside were pencil sketches, multiple drawings of forest trails, the Silver Spring parking lot, and the Menomonee River area. One sketch depicted the exact parking lot where Jenna left her car from an angle not captured by the camera. The sketches, combined with the Milwaukee map marking 5 locations, reinforced that Finch not only kept evidence, he tracked, noted, and mapped victim movements. By the end of the initial search, the ERT removed over 30 related items, including 3 directly tied to Jenna's case. 1. The shift log notebook from November 2, 1998. 2. The silver necklace, engraved JH. 3. The sketch of the Menomonee Forest Trails and Silver Spring parking lot. Additionally, multiple items from the 1995 case were found in the hidden compartment, an unprecedented development forcing the Milwaukee Cold Case Unit to expand review beyond Jenna's case. As the cabin was finally sealed before leaving the scene, one investigator whispered, "Not to anyone in particular, no one vanishes from Milwaukee like that without leaving traces. It just takes long enough. He didn't think we'd come to the Montana woods." And now, inside that quiet wooden cabin, every trace Finch had left over nearly 3 decades had finally seen the light. Finch was brought into the temporary interrogation room at the Helena field office that same afternoon. The room was small, white-walled, with only a steel table and 2 chairs. He entered with wrists still marked from the cuffs, his face ashen like cold stone. No sign of fear, no overt defiance. What lingered in his eyes was the ingrained defensiveness of someone who had lived in the shadows for years. 2 FBI investigators entered, one leading the interrogation, the other observing reactions. The session was fully recorded per protocol. On the table was a bottle of water and a thin file folder, not to overwhelm Finch, but to create a normal setting under the Reed technique. Start with friendliness, draw him into dialogue, then peel away layers of deception. The investigator began in a light tone, "Mr. Elliot Graff, we want to understand your situation. We know you've used this name for many years. Tell us, what is your real name?" Finch leaned back in the chair, eyes down at the table, and replied in a hoarse voice, "I am Elliot Graff, I live alone. I don't know what you people want." The investigator didn't react, just casually twirled a pen in his hand. "The real Elliot Graff died in 1976. Did you know that?" Finch shrugged, a small motion, but enough for the investigator to note in the baseline reaction chart, direct responsibility avoidance. "That's the paperwork I was given. I used it. I haven't hurt anyone." The investigator tilted his head, smiling faintly, a Reed technique element to maintain dialogue, making the subject feel they control the conversation. "We have your photo from 2014, and your photo from 1998 in Milwaukee. You know that, right?" Finch glanced up for the first time, a flash of confusion flickered in his eyes, but it vanished immediately. "I've never been to Milwaukee." The Reed technique shifted to presenting verifiable contradictions. The investigator placed the 1998 hospital photo of Finch on the table. The image was low quality, but the facial features were unmistakable. Then he placed the 2014 Graf driver's license photo beside it. "Help us explain this." Finch crossed his arms, defensive closure. "Those two people aren't me." The investigator didn't argue. Still calm, "We ran facial recognition analysis. The match is nearly 98%. Help me understand why someone with your face appeared in Milwaukee on November 3, 1998. No response. The Reed technique advanced to presenting undeniable facts. The investigator pulled another folder, containing copies of the ATM info, junkyard report, and bus route, showing Finch leaving Milwaukee. "This is bank data. You emptied the account on November 4th. This is the report of selling a white pickup, without paperwork on November 5th. This is data showing you left the state by bus on November 6th. Each statement accompanied by a sheet placed on the table. You weren't in Milwaukee. Then whose Harold Finch account was emptied in Milwaukee? You didn't sell a white pickup? Then why did the seller sign H. Finch? You didn't leave Wisconsin. Then who used your social security number to buy the bus ticket?" Finch clenched his fists. The first time in the session his facial muscles tensed. "I don't remember anything. It's just coincidence." The investigator shifted tactics, moving to the self-protection hypothesis, a key Reed step, often used to make the subject think the truth is less damaging than continuing to lie. "Harold, maybe something happened in 1998 that made you leave Milwaukee. Maybe you were scared. Maybe you just wanted to disappear, start a new life. That doesn't make you a monster, but staying silent makes everything worse." Finch looked straight at the investigator, eyes sharp as a blade, but no longer with the absolute composure from before. "I don't know who Jenna Hartley is," he said. "I didn't do anything. I had no reason to leave Milwaukee because of anyone." The investigator didn't mention the necklace, or the notebook, not yet. Instead, he emphasized the timeline. "You were discharged on November 3rd. Jenna disappeared the evening of November 3rd. You left the state on November 6th. Help us understand why every milestone revolves around the same week." Finch pressed his lips into a thin line. "I don't know her. I'm not involved." That statement, under the Reed technique, was a signal of overly quick denial, often appearing when a subject is cornered. The investigator pushed the folder aside, crossed his arms, and lowered his voice. "Harold, we found her necklace in your house." In that moment, Finch stopped breathing. No movement, no resistance, no reaction like an innocent person wrongly accused. Just a thick silence. The investigator continued. "We also found her shift log, in your cabin, under the floor." Finch closed his eyes for a second, not in pain, but like someone calculating what could still be concealed. The investigator lowered his voice again. "Harold, you met Jenna on November 2nd. You were the last patient in the hospital records she cared for. You kept her notebook. You kept her belongings. You left Milwaukee, right after she disappeared." Silence. The room was so quiet, you could hear a pen drop on the table. The investigator asked the final question in the initial interrogation phase. "Harold, you know the name Jenna Hartley?" Finch opened his eyes, slowly, and looked straight at the investigator. He didn't admit it. He didn't deny it. He just remained silent. A silence that any veteran investigator would recognize. Not the silence of an innocent person, but the silence of someone who knows any further words would only tie the noose around themselves. And that was the moment, after 27 years, when Harold Finch no longer hid behind any lies. He chose silence, because the truth had begun speaking for him. The trial state of Wisconsin versus Harold Finch began in early fall 2025, nearly 30 years after Jenna Hartley disappeared. Courtroom 4 in Milwaukee County was packed. Old investigators, victims' families, press, and even people who had lived in the Silver Spring apartment complex in 1998, all waiting for one question to be answered. After nearly 3 decades, what happened to Jenna? The prosecutor stood before the jury, opening not with emotion, but with the cold structure of a case rebuilt through forensics and federal data. "Today you will see how a man vanished from Wisconsin in 1998, only to reappear under another name in Montana, nearly 30 years later. And you will see how every piece of data, DNA, maps, evidence, timeline, finally fits together to say what the defendant refuses to say. Then they began reconstructing the forensic timeline, a chain stretching from Milwaukee 1998 to Montana 2025. 1. November 2, 1998, Jenna cared for Harold Finch at Fredette Hospital. Finch was the last patient Jenna noted in her shift log. The notebook appeared in the Montana cabin in 2025. 2. November 3, 1998, Jenna disappeared at Silver Spring Drive. Camera captured a white pickup following her car. Witnesses saw two silhouettes near the parking lot. A hair not belonging to Jenna collected from the car later matched the sample Finch discarded in Montana trash. 3. November 4, Finch emptied his only Milwaukee bank account. 4. November 5, Finch sold a white pickup without paperwork to a junkyard. The seller signed H. Finch. 5. November 6, Finch left Wisconsin by interstate bus, on a route leading to New Mexico. A year later, the identity Elliot graph began appearing in that state. 6. 1999, 2019, Finch lived under the identity Elliot graph, a person who died in 1976. He avoided creating any financial traces, moving between mountainous and forested areas. 7. 2019, 2025, Real ID system flagged red when Graf renewed his license. SSA discovered the 1998 Milwaukee match. Comparison of 1998 Finch photo and 2014 Graf photo 94% match. FBI Montana surveillance discovered weapons arsenal. Milwaukee map marking 5 disappearances. Hair DNA from trash matched sample in Jenna's car. Each milestone, each detail presented in an even tone, without emphasis, as if to remind the jury that this was not speculation, but an undeniable chain of events. Physical evidence section. When the prosecution presented the physical evidence recovered from the Montana cabin, the entire courtroom fell completely silent. Jenna's shift log, with the last page noting Finch as the patient she cared for. The silver necklace engraved JH, the item Jenna always wore, vanished in 1998, found in Finch's cabin in 2025. The 1996 Milwaukee map, with 5 red marks at locations of women's disappearances, including Jenna's case. The hidden compartment under the floor, containing evidence from the 1995 disappearance. The matching DNA hair strand. Each item was projected on the large screen, and Finch, sitting in the defendant's chair, hands no longer trembling, maintained the same emotionless eyes as the day he was arrested. No sign of guilt, no remorse, just silence. Cross-examination section. The defense attorney tried to separate each piece. No body, no direct witnesses, no confession. But the prosecution struck directly at the core legal point. We don't need a body, when the entire timeline fits only one person, Harold Finch. They emphasized, no one else matches the DNA in Jenna's car. No one else left Milwaukee at the exact same time. No one else kept Jenna's belongings for nearly 30 years. No one else changed identities right when Jenna disappeared. And finally, no one else but Finch had reason to vanish 36 hours after Jenna disappeared. Key moment in the trial. The prosecution played the interrogation video from the FBI field office. The footage contained no confession, but it had the critical moment, when the investigator said the name Jenna Hartley. Finch, who had lied throughout the interrogation, stopped speaking, falling into complete silence. That silence, the prosecution said, was not the silence of an innocent person. It was the reaction of someone who knew he had no more words to evade with. Charges section. The jury deliberated for nearly 4 hours. When they returned, no one in the courtroom dared breathe heavily. The verdict was read clearly. Guilty. Kidnapping. Class B. Felony. Guilty. First-degree homicide. No body required under Wisconsin statute, when forensic plus circumstantial evidence meets threshold. The sentence was announced at the end of the proceedings. Life imprisonment without parole. Finch showed no reaction, no bowing of the head, no looking around. He just stared straight ahead like a man accustomed to darkness, and who knew that light had finally reached him. 27 years after the day Jenna Hartley vanished without a trace, the Wisconsin justice system finally closed a chapter left open since 1998. After the life sentence handed down to Harold Finch, the Milwaukee Police Department Cold Case Unit, in collaboration with the FBI Helena Field Office, compiled a comprehensive case closure report, officially marking the closure of the Jenna Hartley file after 27 years of investigation. The report began by systematizing all data from 1998 to 2025, stating clearly that Jenna Hartley, 22 years old, disappeared on the night of November 3, 1998, at Silver Spring Drive, Milwaukee, in a context where forensics of that era could not extract degraded DNA and traffic cameras only captured the final 8 seconds of her vehicle. The initial evidence, a strange hair strand, torn fabric scraps and witness statements, was insufficient to establish a suspect. When the file was transferred to the Cold Case Unit in 2001, the name Harold Finch was only considered information for follow-up due to lack of cross-verifiable data. The report emphasized the critical turning point in 2019, when the Real ID program detected an individual named Elliot Graff in Montana, using the identity of a person deceased since 1976. This event activated the SSA fraud unit, and subsequently, through comparison of the 1998 Wisconsin hospital photo and the 2014 Montana driver's license photo, facial recognition algorithms yielded a match exceeding 94%. This led to the determination that Elliot Graff was Harold Finch. From there, the FBI conducted surveillance in Madison Ridge, discovering the subject had lived in isolation for years, possessed a large-scale weapons arsenal, and recovered a hair sample from discarded trash, matching the DNA sample collected from Jenna's car in 1998, with 99.2% compatibility. When Finch was arrested, the cabin search yielded a series of key evidence items: Jenna's shift log from November 2, 1998, with Finch's name on the last page, the silver necklace engraved JH, confirmed by family as the one Jenna always wore, a 1996 Milwaukee map marking 5 female disappearance locations, sketches of the Menomonee River Parkway terrain, and especially the hidden compartment under the floor containing items from the 1995 disappearance victim. The report concluded that the behavior of retaining evidence for nearly 3 decades aligned with the trophy retention offender pattern. The timeline reconstruction presented Finch discharged from Froedtert Hospital on November 3. Jenna disappeared that same evening. Finch emptied his bank account on November 4, sold a white pickup without paperwork on November 5, matching the vehicle description on camera, and left the state by bus on November 6 on a route leading to New Mexico, where the false identity Elliot Graff began appearing from 1999. The report affirmed no data on Finch existed in Wisconsin after the time Jenna disappeared. The prosecution used DNA, Idaho fraud, timeline match, and seized evidence to charge Finch with kidnapping and first-degree homicide under the No Body Required clause. The report also noted Finch's likely involvement in at least 2 other disappearances: the 1995 case, high likelihood due to direct evidence, and the 1993 case, possible likelihood based on map markings. These files were transferred to the Potential Linked Offenses Group for further investigation. The document concluded with the official note, Jenna Marie Hartley, cold case solved after 27 years, offender identified and convicted, Harold Finch, alias Elliot Graff. This was the final confirmation allowing Milwaukee PD to close the file as homicide, ending one of the city's longest pending cases. The story of Jenna Hartley is not just a 27-year investigation journey. It reflects a very American reality today. Personal security and community vigilance can never be taken lightly. The fact that Jenna disappeared in just a few minutes in a familiar parking lot right near her home shows that danger sometimes lies not in unfamiliar places, but in the very spaces we believe are safe. The detail that Finch appeared with his real identity at the hospital, then vanished, and became Elliot Graff for 25 years, reminds us that those who cause harm are sometimes not obvious, dangerous strangers, but people who pass through our lives just once, without ringing any alarm bells. His complete severance of traces, selling the white pickup, emptying his bank account, leaving Wisconsin in just 36 hours, also shows how crimes can be concealed very sophisticatedly when society still relied on limited technology. But at the same time, the story is proof of the power of modern surveillance and investigation systems in the United States. Just one small error in the real ID record, one photo comparison, and one discarded hair sample reopened the door to justice. This sends an important message to the public: trust in the long-term value of data storage, cooperation with investigative agencies, and reporting anything unusual, no matter how small. Jenna was found not through a miraculous moment, but through consistent, persistent, and detailed actions by the community and the justice system. In American life today, that lesson remains fully relevant. Safety is not just a right, but a shared responsibility, built from vigilance, technology, and unwavering pursuit of the truth, even if it takes an entire generation. If you want to continue following decades-long case-solving journeys like Jenna Hartley's story, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any cases reopened through justice and truth. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next video, where we continue bringing light to the dark corners thought forever buried.